A security guard's biggest enemy isn't always an intruder. Sometimes it's just the deafening silence of a building after midnight. A silence so total, it feels like it's pressing in, making you aware of every single beat of your own heart. It's the low hum of the ventilation, the groan of the building settling, the flicker of a fluorescent light way down at the end of some empty hall. These are the sounds of being alone. But what happens when that silence is broken by something that shouldn't be there? What happens when you're the only one watching over a place and you realize you aren't really alone? These 8 stories come from night shift guards who found themselves face to face with the unexplainable. They're accounts from the men and women paid to watch over the quiet, forgotten corners of the world while the rest of us are asleep. From sterile, modern skyscrapers to the decaying skeletons of old industrial plants, they stood their post and saw things that just don't make sense. These are their stories from the loneliest hours of the night. Story 1, The Watchful Soldiers. Our first story comes from a guard named Daniel, who took a job on the graveyard shift at a new, gleaming high-rise in a busy commercial district. For the most part, the job was exactly what you'd think, quiet and monotonous. His duties were simple. He and his partner, a guy named Raj, would switch off between the front security desk in the huge marble lobby and doing patrols of the building. The patrol was a long, repetitive loop. Daniel would start up on the 39th floor and work his way down. Each floor had 2 staircases, one on the east side and one on the west. His route was a zigzag. He'd take one stairwell down a floor, walk the length of the office, and then use the opposite stairwell to get to the next floor down. Most of the floors were leased by tech companies and law firms, all of them dark and silent at night, the glass walls of their offices reflecting his flashlight beam like 100 pairs of eyes watching him pass. For the first few months, the biggest fight was just staying awake. The silence and the still, conditioned air could almost put you in a trance. But then Daniel started to notice little things, small details that just felt off. An office chair pulled out from a desk he was positive had been pushed in. The faint smell of old-fashioned cologne in a hallway that should only smell like cleaning supplies. He mentioned it to his partner, Raj, who just laughed and said, it was the building groaning. One Friday night around 11 p.m. Daniel started his patrol from the 39th floor, like always, but the building felt different. The air felt heavier, colder. As he was crossing the 16th floor, he passed the central elevator lobby, and he just froze. This whole floor was supposed to be vacant, stripped down to the bare concrete while waiting for a new tenant. But sitting right in the middle of the empty floor was a bright pink children's umbrella, wide open. Next to it was a small red rubber ball. A chill went right through him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His first thought was that Raj was playing a prank, trying to spook the new guy. But the veteran was lazy. He never would have gone to the trouble of finding those things and planting them there during his own patrol. Daniel tried to convince himself there was a logical reason for it and finished his rounds, his heart pounding the whole way. When he got back to the lobby, he found Raj exactly where he expected him to be, fast asleep in the mailroom. He didn't say a word about the umbrella and the ball. He found out later from some of the guards who'd been there longer that his experience wasn't unique. The building, they told him, had a history of weird things happening. The hauntings were never mean, they said, more playful. They told him stories of strange sounds, the feeling of being watched, and objects moving on their own. One guard even told him a rumor that the skyscraper was built over an old cemetery. Daniel tried to ignore it all. He needed the job. He got used to the strange feelings and the odd discoveries, and the job became boring again. Until one night, about a year in, his partner was a new hire, a young kid still getting used to the deep solitude of the night shift. Around 3 Daniel was at the front desk while the new guy was supposedly checking the lower floors. An hour went by with no radio contact, and Daniel started to get a bad feeling. He left the desk to go look for his partner. He found him on the 5th floor, but he wasn't patrolling. He was fast asleep in an executive chair in a dark corner office. Daniel was about to yell at him when he stopped cold. Standing around the sleeping rookie were 3 figures. They were hazy and translucent, but he could clearly make out their forms. They were soldiers. Their uniforms were old, nothing he'd ever seen before, and they were just staring down at the sleeping kid with these stern, disapproving looks. One of them raised a hand and pointed, and Daniel heard a voice, sharp and guttural, speaking what sounded like Japanese. It was scolding the kid for sleeping on the job. Daniel didn't scream or run. He just stood there, hidden in the shadows of the hall, completely frozen. The figures seemed to notice him then. They all turned their heads at the same time, their ghostly eyes locking right onto his. There was no anger there, just a calm acknowledgement, and then, as slowly as they had appeared, they just faded into nothing, leaving the young guard snoring in the chair. Daniel backed away, went straight to the ground floor, and chain smoked outside until the sun came up, the Japanese words echoing in his head. Story 2, The Thing in the Brewery. Our next story takes us from the clean, quiet halls of a high-rise to the damp, decaying heart of an old brewery. This story comes from a guard who asked to be called Zaksa. He'd just started working the 3rd shift at a local brewery, a huge property with 2 main buildings, the brewery itself, where production happened, and a separate bar and tap room about 200 feet away. The routine was to use the bar as a home base, since it had a good view of the whole property. Right from his first week, he felt like something was deeply wrong with the place. He first wrote it off as just the normal jitters of being alone in a new, dark place. The bar had motion-activated lights, which was convenient, but also a constant source of anxiety. The brewery was a maze of steel tanks, humming machines, and dark catwalks. Part of his job was to patrol through this industrial labyrinth, which always made him feel watched. But the real dread started when he'd get back to the quiet of the empty bar. One night, around 4, he was in the brewery, finishing his patrol when he heard a noise. It was the clear clang of a metal tool hitting an engine, followed by more banging. He froze and listened. The sound was loud and deliberate. He radioed that he was checking on a possible intruder and crept toward the sound. As he came around a row of giant fermentation tanks, a set of motion-activated floodlights flickered on at the end of the room, lighting up an empty space. The banging stopped. He found a big wrench lying on the floor, nowhere near where it was supposed to be. Nobody was there. Shaken, he finished his patrol and walked back to the bar. As he got closer, he saw the lights inside were off, just like they should be. The door to a back storage room was open just a crack. He walked inside, and after a few steps, the main lights blinked on. He stopped dead in his tracks, dead. Standing in the open doorway to the back room was a figure. He said it was humanoid, but not quite human. Its arms were way too long, hanging almost to its knees. Its upper body was covered in this thick, matted, dark hair that hid its face. The thing was huge, so tall it looked like it had to duck to get through the doorway. It just stood there, a black silhouette against the darkness of the room behind it. Time just seemed to stop. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He was staring at something impossible, something his brain just refused to process. He blinked once, a quick, spastic motion, and in that instant, it was gone. The doorway was empty. The heavy, oppressive feeling that had filled the room was gone with it. He stood there for what felt like forever, his heart pounding. He finally forced himself to check the back room, his hand shaking as he held his flashlight. It was empty. There was no way in or out except for the door where it had been standing. In the weeks after, he tried to learn more, carefully asking some of the day shift workers if they'd ever seen anything weird. Most of them just laughed it off, but a couple of the older guys would give each other a look. They seemed to know what he was talking about, but absolutely refused to discuss it. He saw the creature a few more times, but only ever in the bar. One evening, he was coming back from patrol and stood in the small airlock space between the two sets of doors, waiting for the heavy outer door to swing shut. As it closed, he saw the creature's reflection in the glass. It was standing right behind him, towering over him, its long arms hanging limp. He whipped around, and nothing was there. From that day on, he never waited in that airlock again. He would rush inside, turn on all the lights by hand, and only then turn to watch the door close. The feeling of being watched, of sharing that dark, quiet space with something unknown and inhuman, never left him. Story 3, The Headless Attendant. From a creature that defies description, we turn to a spirit that seems to be lost in time, stuck replaying its final moments. This story comes from a guard named Leo, who worked security at a remote campground next to a large, marshy wetlands preserve. His job was the very definition of isolated. He was the only person for miles, and his job was just to make slow, looping patrols in an old pickup truck around the campground, the boat launch, and a gravel parking lot for a trailhead. Most nights, the only sounds were crickets and the croaking of frogs from the marsh. The darkness out there was absolute, a thick, inky black that his truck's headlights could barely cut through. It was a job for someone who was comfortable with being completely alone. Leo thought he was that person. The local legends were full of stories about the wetlands. People said it was a place where things just got lost, where the line between our world and another was thin. One of the most common stories was about a man who was murdered in the parking lot decades ago, killed by a shotgun blast at close range during a deal gone wrong. Leo was a practical guy. He didn't believe in ghost stories. One autumn night, a heavy fog rolled in from the marsh, covering everything. Visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. Leo was on his last patrol, around 3:30 a.m., driving slowly through the empty gravel lot. The fog was swirling in his headlights, making ghostly shapes. It was already an eerie scene, but what he saw next would stick with him forever. Standing at the edge of the woods, right where the trail started, was a figure. It looked like a man, just waiting for someone. As Leo's truck crept closer, his headlights lit the figure up more clearly. He was dressed in a simple work shirt and jeans, but something was terribly wrong. The man had no head. Leo slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the gravel. He just stared, his mind unable to make sense of what he was seeing. Where the man's head and neck should have been, there was just foggy air, but the figure was moving. It took a step forward and raised an arm, as if it was asking for help, waving him closer. Pure terror grabbed a hold of Leo, This wasn't a trick of the fog. It was the man from the stories, an apparition of someone violently killed, now forever asking for help in the place he died. Without a second thought, Leo threw the truck into reverse, his eyes locked on the headless figure. It took another step toward him, its hand still reaching out. He spun the wheel, tires spitting gravel, and floored it, not even caring where he was going, just that it was away from there. He didn't stop until he was on the main road, his body shaking uncontrollably. He radioed his supervisor, his voice a choked whisper, and told him he was quitting right then and there. He never went back to the campground, but the image of that headless man, hand outstretched in the fog, is burned into his memory, a silent plea he can never unsee. Some spirits seem to want something from us, while others are just a terrifying, split-second glimpse into another reality. As we head into our fourth story, if you're enjoying these accounts from the loneliest hours of the night, please take a second to like this video and subscribe for more true horror. It really helps us find and share more stories like this one. Now, imagine seeing something that your brain flat out refuses to accept, something that's there one moment and gone the next. Story 4, The Man Who Wasn't There. This next account is from Carlos, a guard assigned to a big corporate office park on the edge of the city. The site was a cluster of modern, low-rise buildings, all connected by neat lawns and dimly lit paths. Carlos's post was the central security hub, a small room filled with a wall of CCTV monitors showing feeds from over 100 cameras. His job was to be the all-seeing eye in the middle of the night. The job was soul-crushingly boring. For hours on end, he'd just watch empty hallways, lobbies, and parking lots. The only movement he'd usually see was a moth fluttering near a camera lens or a stray cat darting across a lawn. He got to know the rhythm of the empty buildings like the back of his hand. One Tuesday night, or really, Wednesday morning, at around 2:15 a.m., something broke that rhythm. On monitor 12, showing the long, stair-sterile hallway on the third floor of Building C, a figure appeared. It was a man dressed all in black, wearing a hoodie that kept his face in total shadow. He was just standing there, completely still, right in the middle of the hall. Carlos sat bolt upright, instantly awake and on high alert. He hadn't seen anyone come in. All the doors were locked and alarmed. He zoomed the camera in. But the hood and the dim light made it impossible to see the man's face. He had an intruder. Carlos reached for his radio to call it in, his eyes still glued to the screen. He glanced down for just a split second to hit the transmit button. And when he looked back up, the hallway was empty. The man was gone. His heart skipped a beat. He rewound the footage. And there it was. The man appears, stands perfectly still for 30 seconds, and then vanishes. He didn't walk away. He didn't duck into an office. He was there in one frame and simply gone in the next. It was like a glitch in the system. Except this was happening live. A cold dread washed over him. He started frantically switching between cameras, searching every feed for the man in the hood. Nothing. The buildings were silent and empty. He replayed the footage from monitor 12 over and over. Every single time, the result was the same. The man just ceased to exist. He thought he was losing his mind. Maybe it was a power surge, a ghost in the machine. He tried to rationalize it, but the image was too solid. Over the next few weeks, it happened again. The man in the black hood would appear on a random camera, sometimes in a hallway, sometimes a parking garage. One time, even in an empty cafeteria. And every time, the instant Carlos blinked or looked away, he'd be gone. He never once saw the figure move. It was always just there, a silent, still sentinel in the lonely corners of the property. He stopped trying to report it. Who would believe him? He would just stare at the monitor, his heart pounding in a silent standoff. The real horror wasn't just seeing it. It was what it did to his mind. It made him question his own sanity, his own eyes. Was it a ghost, a glitch, or was the crushing loneliness of the night shift finally breaking him? He never found out. He eventually transferred to a day shift, unable to stand another night of watching the screens, waiting for the man who wasn't there to show up again. Story 5, the 3 a.m. laughter. Sometimes you see them, other times you only hear them, and a sound without a source can be so much scarier. Our 5th story comes from a guard named Jenna who worked security at a huge fancy casino after it closed for the night. Closing time was 2 a.m. Once the last gamblers were gone, the loud, chaotic energy of the casino floor would just vanish, and a deep, unsettling silence would take its place. The thousands of slot machines, normally a symphony of bells and chimes, stood dark and silent. The poker tables were all empty. It was Jenna's job to patrol this huge, surreal space and make sure everything was secure. The sheer size of the empty casino was intimidating. The long rows of slot machines created endless, narrow canyons. The high ceilings, which felt grand when the place was full of people, now seemed to just swallow her flashlight beam, making her feel tiny. One night, around 3, she was walking her route through the main gaming floor when she heard it, a faint giggle. It sounded like a young woman, and it was so quiet, she almost thought she imagined it. She stopped, turned off her flashlight, and just listened. Nothing but the low hum of the building's HVAC. She shook her head, blamed it on being tired, and kept walking. A few minutes later, she heard it again, a little louder this time. A clear he. It echoed a little in the massive empty room and seemed to be coming from the high-limit slots area. Her heart started beating faster. She figured a patron must have hidden somewhere as a prank. "This is security," she called out, her voice sounding tiny. "The casino is closed. You need to come out now." The only answer was silence. She cautiously started walking toward the high-limit area, her hand on her radio. The section was a maze of plush carpet and fancy machines. As she walked in, the laughter erupted again, much louder this time. It wasn't a playful giggle anymore. It was a full-on, maniacal laugh that bounced off the walls, sounding like it was coming from everywhere at once. Jenna spun around, her flashlight beam cutting frantically through the dark. "Who's there? Show yourself." The laughter stopped cold, plunging the room back into a deafening silence. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She could feel eyes on her from the shadows between the silent machines. She slowly backed out of the area, never taking her eyes off the darkness. As she got back to the main floor, the laughter started one last time. It didn't sound human anymore. It was a warped, chilling sound that grated on her nerves. That was it for her. She didn't run, but she walked fast, right back to the small, windowless security office. She locked the door behind her, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. She spent the rest of her shift in that tiny room, watching the cameras, straining to hear anything over the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. The cameras showed nothing but empty rooms and silent machines. But she knew what she heard. she'd heard the madness that hangs in the air of a place built on fortune and ruin long after the lights go out. Story 6. The Cowboy in the Corridor. From sounds with no source, we go to undeniable proof of presence. This story is from a guard named Sam, who worked the night shift at an old, creaky municipal building. The place had been a courthouse in a former life, and you could feel its age. The floors groaned, the pipes hissed, and the wind howled through the old window frames. Sam was used to the building's nightly noises and had learned to tune out its usual creaks and groans. His post was a small desk on the ground floor by the main entrance. His patrols were simple, just a walkthrough of all 3 floors to check the doors. For the first year, the job was quiet, a perfect gig for him to catch up on his reading. Then, he started hearing the footsteps. It began faintly. He'd be sitting at his desk, reading a book, and would hear a sound from the floor right above him. At first, he brushed it off as the building's settling. But the sound got more consistent, clearer. It wasn't just a creak, it was a footstep. And it had a specific sound, the heavy rhythmic clomp of someone wearing hard-soled boots, like cowboy boots, walking on the old tile floor. Every night around 1:30, the footsteps would start. They'd begin at one end of the second-floor hall, pace slowly and deliberately to the other end, and stop. Then they'd turn around and pace all the way back, over and over again. The first few times it happened, Sam went to check it out. He'd grab his big mag light and head up the stairs. The second his foot hit the second-floor landing, the footsteps would stop. He'd walk the whole hallway, shining his light into every empty office and dark corner. He never found anything. The hall was always empty. But as soon as he got back to his desk downstairs, the pacing would start right back up. He started watching the second-floor camera on his monitor, but the camera just showed an empty, silent hallway, even as the sound of the heavy boots echoed down the stairwell to his desk. It was maddening. The sound was so real, so solid. He could almost feel the vibrations. But there was nothing there. This nightly routine started to get to him. It wasn't scary in a jump-out, at you kind of way. It was a slow, creeping dread, like a form of psychological torture. Who was this phantom walker? Why was he pacing that one hallway? Night after night, Sam found out from a daytime janitor that decades ago, a judge who was famous for his stern attitude and his habit of wearing cowboy boots had worked in that building. He died of a heart attack one afternoon while working late in his second-floor office. Sam wasn't sure if the story was true, but it put a face to his nightly visitor. He never got used to the sound. Every night at 1:30, he'd put on his headphones and crank his music, trying to drown out the sound of the judge's restless, endless patrol. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between songs, he could still hear him, pacing back and forth in the dark, forever walking his beat. Story 7. The Cemetery Sprinter. A phantom sound is one thing, but what about a phantom you can see? One that moves faster than any person possibly could. This terrifying story comes from a guard named Mike, who had the lovely job of patrolling a large construction site at night. The site was for a new housing development, but what made the job especially creepy was its location. It was right next to a huge, ancient cemetery. A 10-foot-tall chain-link fence was the only thing separating the muddy, half-finished construction site from the rows of old tombstones and dark trees. Part of Mike's job was to walk the entire fence line every 2 hours to check for breaks. Walking next to a cemetery in the middle of the night is unnerving no matter what. The silence just feels different, heavier. You can't help but think about what's lying just a few feet away, under the ground. Mike had been on the job for a few weeks and was getting used to the spooky atmosphere. He'd see deer and raccoons, but nothing really strange, until one moonless night. He was about halfway through his midnight patrol, walking the part of the fence that ran alongside the oldest section of the cemetery. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of movement. He stopped and peered through the fence into the graveyard. He saw it again. It was a figure, shaped like a man, but it was just a solid, featureless black silhouette, and it was moving. It wasn't walking or jogging. It was sprinting. With an impossible liquid speed, it darted between the tombstones. Moving parallel to him, Mike froze, solid. The speed was completely unnatural. No person could run that fast, especially not over the uneven, root-covered ground of an old cemetery. It was like watching a video on fast forward. The shadow thing covered 50 yards in the blink of an eye, then disappeared into the deeper darkness under a large oak tree. Mike just stood there, his mind scrambling for a rational explanation. An athlete training at night, a trespasser. Nothing made sense. The speed, the smooth motion, it wasn't human. He finished his patrol on high alert, constantly scanning the fence, but he saw nothing else. He tried to tell himself it was a trick of the light or an animal he'd misidentified. But a week later, he saw it again. Same time, same place. He was walking the perimeter, and the sprinting shadow appeared, running its silent, impossible race. This time, he got a better look. It had the shape of a person, but no features at all, no clothes, no face, just a void of pure blackness, moving with terrifying speed. He saw the cemetery sprinter 4 more times while he worked at that site. It was always the same. A fleeting glimpse of a shadow figure and a frantic, otherworldly dash through the gravestones. He never felt threatened by it, just a deep sense of awe and terror. He felt like he was seeing something he wasn't meant to see. A brief tear in reality that revealed something that moves in the spaces between seconds, forever running in the city of the dead. Story 8. The Voice on the Radio. For our final story, we have something that mixes the modern with the ancient, a voice from nowhere, speaking a language the guard couldn't understand in a place where it should have been impossible. This account is from Alex, a security guard at a Tier 4 data center. If you're not familiar, a high security data center is one of the most controlled places on Earth. It's a fortress of technology, built to be safe from almost any threat, physical or digital. The building Alex worked in was a windowless concrete cube, shielded from electromagnetic interference, with multiple layers of biometric security. For all practical purposes, it was a sealed box. Alex's job was to be the human part of this fortress. He patrolled the cold, humming server aisles, and watched the camera feeds from a small office. It was a deeply isolating job. His only regular conversation was with himself, calling in routine checks on his walkie-talkie. The radio system was a closed loop, meaning it only communicated with other radios on that one. Encrypted channel. There was only one other radio, a backup unit sitting on a charger at his desk. One night, the monotony was shattered. Around 3:30 a.m., as he was sitting in the profound quiet of the security office, his radio crackled to life. It wasn't the usual static. It was a voice. It was a man, speaking clearly and calmly, but he wasn't speaking English. Alex didn't recognize the language, but it sounded like it might have been Arabic. Alex froze. He grabbed the radio from his belt. "Unidentified transmission. Please identify yourself," he said, his voice tight. No response. Just a few seconds of silence. Then the voice came back. This time, it was different. The calm tone was gone. It sounded urgent, distressed. The man was speaking faster, his voice getting higher. Alex couldn't understand the words, but he could definitely understand the terror in the man's voice. Alex's mind was racing. How was this possible? There were no other guards on site. The building was shielded. No outside radio signals should be able to get in. He checked the backup radio on the charger. It was off. He was the only one with a working radio. He frantically called his off-site supervisor on the landline. As he was trying to explain the impossible situation, the voice came through his radio one last time. It wasn't words anymore. It was a scream, a long, drawn-out scream of pure agony and fear that cut through the silence of the room, then ended with a final sick crackle of static. And then, nothing. The supervisor had no explanation. A full diagnostic was run on the radio system the next day. They found nothing. The equipment was working perfectly. There was no record of any transmission, no breach of the encrypted channel. According to the technology, it never happened, but Alex knew it did. He heard it. In one of the most secure, sterile, and technologically advanced places in the world, he received a broadcast from nowhere, a ghost in the machine, a voice from another place, or maybe another time, crying out in a language he didn't know, but in a tone of terror that everyone understands. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been a crossed wire, an accidental audience for someone's final, desperate moments. The night shift is more than just a job. It's like entering a different world. When the sun goes down and everyone else goes home, buildings stop being just buildings. They take on new, mysterious lives. The silence in these empty places gives room for echoes of the past and whispers from the unknown to come through. For the guards who stand watch, the line between our world and something else can get terrifyingly thin. Whether these encounters are truly paranormal or just what happens when solitude and stress play tricks on the mind, the fear they cause is undeniably real. The job can take a heavy psychological toll. In fact, one study from the University of Portsmouth found that almost 40% of security guards they interviewed showed symptoms of PTSD, often from abuse and violent encounters. The shadows they see and the sounds they hear are a heavy weight to carry. What you've heard tonight are just a few of those stories, shared by the people who walked the dark hallways so the rest of us didn't have to. If you have your own story to tell a night shift encounter that still haunts you, or a brush with the unexplained you can't forget, we want to hear it. Send your story to the email address in the description below. You never know, your experience might just be in a future video. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what you listen for in the dark.